Okay, just before I start painting this blue crab, I want to give you an idea of my setup. I'm by a north facing window, so I've got nice north light which is not glaring. Then I've got a large Frank Webb watercolour palette which gives plenty of room for mixing paints, and there are no ridges in between the wells, so you can actually pull paint straight down onto the palette for mixing, which is the way I like to paint. Then I've got two watercolour brushes. One is a size 3 round and one is a size 6 round. The colours I'm going to be using today are going to be French Ultramarine blue and Cobalt blue, which is this one. I'm also going to use Hooker's green, which is over here, and Winsor green, which is in the corner. And I'm going to be using a little tiny bit of Alizarin crimson, which is this deep ruby red over here. I've also got a jug full of clean water, a little spray bottle which gives a very fine mist, and my drawing of a crab there on Saunders Waterford paper. It's £140 and the surface is called Knot, that's N-O-T, also known as cold pressed, and a watercolour rag. So that's all I need to get going, and this is my reference image that I'm going to try and replicate. Here's my colours that I've painted out already, so that to show you how they look at full strength and when they're dry on the same paper. So it's quite a limited palette, but I'm going to focus on actually doing strong tones, so a nice mix from light, medium to dark. Okay, so first of all I'm going to use pure clean water to wet the whole surface of the crab. This takes a little bit of time, but then it gives us a nice satin surface on which to paint, and it opens up the fibres of the paper and gives us a nicer watercolour look. You can paint straight onto the paper and that will give you a sort of crisper effect, but I want the watercolour to do its thing, so I'm just going to wet all the parts of the crab. If you're in a centrally heated house, by the time you've finished wetting the whole crab, the part you started on might have dried out a bit and is only damp. In that case, just go over it again, because we want there to be a very fine sheen on the paper. If it's damp, there's no sheen on the paper, and that's no good to us because it's not going to stay wet enough for long enough. So you need to aim for the paper to have as I say, a fine sheen on it, a sort of satin finish as I call it, and then you're ready to paint. This paper is 100% cotton rag as opposed to wood pulp, which most watercolour papers are, especially student grade papers. And because it's 100% cotton rag, it absorbs an awful lot of water. So you need to be quite generous at the beginning, and it will soak in. This size 3 round brush is just right for getting into all the little curves and small shapes of this crab. When I come to do the main shell, I'll use a size 6 brush, which will cover the area more quickly. This is £140 paper, £140 per square metre, and it's got a slight tooth in it. It's got a little bit of a textured surface, and it's called knot, as opposed to hot pressed, which is very smooth. Knot paper is also known as cold pressed paper. There are three basic types of watercolour paper. There's hot pressed, which is really smooth and it's like cartridge paper almost. Then there's knot, also known as cold pressed. That's sort of the middle of the road paper, which is the most favoured paper. It's the most popular paper. And then you've got rough, which is, as the name says, has a lot of texture, a lot of tooth, and so that's good for doing paintings where you want a lot of breaking up in the painting. You don't want it to be a smooth finish, you want it to be quite rough and textured. Great for doing sparkle on the ocean or snow scenes or waterfall scenes. But it can be used for any subject. You can paint a portrait on rough paper. Obviously you'll just get a much more textured look. Okay, so the legs are all done. I'm going to re-wet the crab shell in the middle, because that's dried out quite a bit already. As you can see, the paper is starting to cockle a little bit now. That's because I'm adding water to it and it's buckling. I haven't stretched this piece of paper. You can stretch watercolour paper using gummed tape and stretch it to a 1/4 inch plywood board. I do that sometimes, but mostly I paint my painting. Then when it's completely dry, I turn it over and I give it a mist all over, a very fine mist with pure water. Let it soak in, and don't worry, it won't affect the paint of your painting. Let it soak in, then cover it each side with 2 other pieces of watercolour paper and put it between some heavy books, and overnight, and in the morning it'll be flat as a pancake. So to start with, I'm going to paint a very random wash of cobalt blue to give us the basic colour of the crab. And because, if you can just see the satin finish, if I tilt it to the camera, it's slightly shiny, but it's not sopping wet. And now we're ready to go. So with a dilute wash of cobalt blue, just drop in some colour, and because the crab is wet already, when I pick it up and tilt it in a minute, it'll run randomly all over and give us a nice loose effect. You could call this an undercoat if you want, because on top we'll be putting darker colours and different colours, but essentially we're trying to kill the white now and start building the layers up. Okay, so that's quite a nice pale blue. I'm going to tilt it from side to side. You can see it starting to run, the paint starting to run and granulate, which is the beautiful thing about watercolour. With your small size 3 brush again, you could go back in and pull that water closer to the edge of some of the segments of his legs. If the water hasn't gone right to the edge, don't be afraid to go in and coax it out to the edge with a smaller brush, like there. That needs to come out on that side there. So we're just encouraging the pigment to the outline of the crab, so that there's not so much white showing at the edge. It's not an exact science, just and you his eyes and his little sort of feelers. Okay, so this will dry very pale. I mean, cobalt blue is quite pale anyway, it's quite a pale blue. It'll dry even paler. Watercolour always dries paler than when you first apply it. But this now is at a perfect stage, it's satin all over, and it's ready now for me to apply some hooker's green. I'm just going to mix up a puddle of hooker's green on top of whatever blue is left on the palette. Don't be afraid to mix them in. And then I'm going to start putting the green near the front side of the crab, the front part of the crab. And can you see it's mixing easily and interestingly with the blue that's already been painted on. I'm just wanting to create a nice mix of blues and greens, and so I'm painting at the edge of the segments of his legs and leaving some of the inner blue still showing, and same again with the smaller legs. Just paint on the edges and then let the paint flow in to the colour that's already there. So you're not painting it wall to wall, you're letting the medium do it, as they say. I'm just going to introduce a little bit of green to the back legs there. So essentially I want this half of the crab more green than blue. And at this point I'm going to stop and let it all dry. You can walk away from it and leave it dry for an hour, but because I want to do this quickly I'm going to use a hairdryer. I wouldn't recommend using a hairdryer all the time because it does tend to make the paint look flat and a bit dead. So let's just stop for now. Okay, so now we've got a totally dry crab, and next we're going to use some French Ultramarine. So mix up a puddle of French Ultramarine, which is a stronger blue, and now we're going to apply this on top of the previous wash. But we're going to leave some little chinks of the previous wash showing for interest, otherwise there wouldn't have been any point in applying it. So make sure you leave some of the previous wash showing through. As you can see now I'm painting wet on to dry. I haven't re-wet the crab. So this is going to give me a crisper look, a different look to the first look, which was quite watery and poetic, which is what we wanted. And then into that I'm going to add some stronger French Ultramarine blue and start suggesting darker areas in parts of the shell for differentiation, so that we haven't got it all one tone. I've lost his eye there. Okay, so I'm going to drop some more French Ultramarine blue, a stronger pigment, into this part of the shell. And I'm going to tip it and let it all run. And then with a smaller brush, I'm going to do some work on the legs. So I'm just adding an outline which I'll soften in a minute. I'm just adding some blue, and I'm indicating the creases in between the joints, the little lines there. I want those to show up. Then with a moist brush I'm going to turn the paint, and this is a clean moist brush. I'm just going to start painting far away and move into that blue so that it runs. So start further away, move in, then touch into the blue so it softens it, so it bleeds across and it gives a rounded effect. And then I drop in some darker French Ultramarine blue to the other side, so the centre stays paler than the edges. So you can do that over the whole crab. So you get a nice mix of soft edges and hard edges. And drop in a little bit of strong blue at the outermost part. So clear water and brush into that line you've put on so that it breaks it up. Don't be afraid to rub the brush back and forth to encourage it if it's started to dry a little bit, as this one has. Just shows how quickly the paint dries. I've got the central heating on because it's a bit cold today. And then drop in some blue. So we've got some nice watercolour effects there. And same again with the other side. So I'm going to use French Ultramarine blue. On the outline of the legs. And not being too perfect about applying the paint here, because I still want it to look like a painting and not a photograph. So I spin it round, use a clear brush with clear water, and then paint into that outline you've made again. I'm using a thicker line on these back legs because they're a bit chunkier. So I'm using thicker French Ultramarine line to start with, and then I'll soften those in the same way as I did the thinner ones. And then for the front claws, I'm going to add some Winsor green now to this French Ultramarine blue mix to differentiate these strong front claws, which will be my sort of focus, from the other claws. So this is more a greeny blue mix and it's quite strong. And while I'm at it, I'm going to drop some of it around the edges of the crab to suggest darker shadow areas while it's still wet, so we get a nice wet into wet effect. There, on that bottom right hand corner of the crab there, and along some of the sides of the legs too. And indicate the joints with this dark colour as well. And because it's still a bit damp, they will bleed a little bit and go soft, and that's good. So we've got some nice mix of hard and soft edges. I'm going to carry on with this dark bluey green. And now to soften it, don't be afraid to flip your painting around to get it in the best position for you to work. So I'm working into that green and it's flowing out then. So you've got a nice mixture of strong pigment and watery pale pigment. And then take it round the outside, the other side of the leg. So can you see we're getting a highlight in the middle there? Again, don't be afraid to encourage it out if it's dried. And I'm going to drop some pigment in there to differentiate that front claw. I'll spin it round this way. Take that pigment around the outline of the actual claw, painting into that dark green, letting it flood out. And then using the pigment to go around the outside. And if you run out of pigment, just pick some more off the palette and drop it into that outer edge. I need to redefine this outer edge, so I'm just going to use more pigment there, just on the outer side. The back legs are still a little bit too pale, so I'm going to go back in with some pure French Ultramarine blue. And redefine those legs. I'm doing the same action again. Painting the outline and the little joints. And then softening. Rinse your brush often, so that you're going in with clean water, and then when the paint runs, it runs into clean water. Then more French Ultramarine to define this outline this side. Same again on that one. So I'm starting to get some variety in tones now, but it's still not strong enough by a long shot. So now I'm going to mix up some very dark French Ultramarine blue with Winsor green and really define these foreground claws. So that's a very dark green there, but because it's still wet, it'll soften. So you've got a bit of leeway. A good painting has a really good variety of tones. We want to kick out these darks so that it'll make the lights lighter. Don't be afraid of going dark. And I'm going to re-darken this shadow side of the crab that I'd started to darken earlier on. So again, this dark bluey green mix, keeping this bottom right hand corner of the crab very dark, so I want to suggest this is in shadow, and therefore parts of these legs will be darker because the cast shadow of the shell is darkening these parts of the legs as they come out from the shell, so we don't want any light on those. While I've still got this bluey green mix on the palette, I'm going to add a tiny bit of Alizarin crimson. It's a very strong colour and it will really give a potent, rich black, and I use black in inverted commas because I don't use tube black ever, because I think it makes your paintings look amateurish straight away. Never use tube black, throw it away. You can mix a black, a velvety black out of a really dark red and a really dark green as I'm doing here, or you can use burnt umber and French Ultramarine. That will give you a terrific black that when it dries it's got hints of blue and brown in it, so make your paintings look much more interesting instead of flat tube black. Even if you wanted to paint a lump of coal, you could paint it using a brown and a blue. So now the darks are really starting to show through. And I'm going to stop there because my final washes I want to apply wet onto dry, and the crab is still too wet for now. Okay, so I dried the crab using the hairdryer again, but as I say, try not to do that. Try and just leave the crab dry naturally if you're doing this at home. It'll have a nicer effect. So now, as I'm looking at the crab, I can see some areas are a bit too monotone. For example, this leg here, I mean that blue is all the same tone. It's a bit boring. This is nice. It's got a good selection of really dark darks and some lights and some mids. So to correct this blue, I'll just go in and pick up some of that bluey green that I still had on the palette with a hint of Alizarin crimson in it, and section off the legs a bit more clearly. And any other legs that you see that might be lacking a bit of definition. We don't want them all to be like carbon copy cutouts of each other, but I felt that needed a bit more definition. It's a little bit better. So now, to finish off, I want to add some pure strokes of just pure cobalt blue, quite strong pigment, not too much water to it. I'm just going to bang those colours in to give the shell a bit more life, like that. And same with part of the claws at the front. I want to introduce some blue. For variety. And also this makes the highlights in the middle look whiter. Not whiter, sorry, look brighter, because you've got enough contrast between the darks. And same on the smaller legs. If you make something darker, the thing next to it will appear lighter. This leg is a little bit unfinished here, so some pure cobalt blue, straight from the tube with a little bit of water added, that's all, just so that I can move it on the paper. I'm just going to place that blue on the top side of the legs. And we're almost finished. I always add some spatter to my paintings, especially my illustrations, because I feel it helps anchor them to the paper. So mix up quite a dilute wash of whatever colours you've got left on your palette with quite a big headed brush. This size 6 should do it, so it holds a lot of liquidy paint, and then just spatter here and there for a bit of interest. And that's finished. I'll just sign. And there we are. And here's the finished painting. You can see the tones are different, are stronger in the bottom right hand side of the shell. And this is another painting that I did yesterday, but the filming didn't come out too well. Again, using the same colours, and this one has better highlights, I think. The whites and the shiny parts of the shell are stronger. And I did that by using crisper edges where the highlights were, instead of softer edges as I did on this crab. It all depends on the look that you want to get. Thanks for watching.